This is Talking Foreign Policy, a critical look at Canada's role abroad. Today, we're going to discuss the anti-China climate amidst the federal election, even as we have Donald Trump threatening to annex Canada, launching aggressive economic warfare or trade war against Canada. The major media outlets are really pushing this anti-China kind of direction. During the federal election leadership debate, we had a truck apparently sponsored by Rebel News saying Mark Carney cares more about keeping ties to China than fighting for the best interests of Canadians. In the Globe and Mail, in the more respectable mainstream, they published a piece a week ago titled "Liberal Candidate Accepted Invite to Celebrate People's Liberation Army Event" at the top of the page on A3. And the story is that a Liberal candidate, Peter Yun, who is replacing another candidate that was pushed out because his apparent association with China, that Peter Yun, a decade ago, when he was a Toronto police officer, participated in a ceremony, the 70th anniversary ceremony of the Chinese defeat of Japan during World War II, which of course was part of what Canada was fighting against Japan during World War II. And they are framing this as some sort of scandalous behavior that a liberal candidate in the federal election would have participated in a commemoration of China's role in defeating Japan during World War II. Now, to discuss this anti-China climate and this effort by media outlets, particularly the Globe and Mail, to try to say anything to do with China is dangerous. We have Alex Tyrrell, who is the leader of the Green Party of Quebec, who is about to go on a week-long trip, sponsored trip to China. First of all, thanks for coming on Talking Foreign Policy, Alex. And can you kind of just sort of discuss your trip to China in the context, or maybe somewhat as partly a reaction, if you like, to some of this anti-China climate and this notion that it's illegitimate to have any ties or connection to the Chinese government?
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for having me on the show, Eve. So that's it. In less than 24 hours, I'm going to be taking off for Beijing. And I'm going on this trip that's organized by the Chinese embassy in Ottawa. We're going to have a tour of some high-tech facilities. We're going to look at some environmental issues, some conservation projects they're doing, and also going to meet with officials from the foreign ministry to hear their point of view on Canada-China relations. So it's a really exciting opportunity to go and sort of get the perspective of the Chinese government and take a look at some of their accomplishments. And one of the things that got me really interested in Canada-China relations is this mainstream hysteria that we have over Chinese influence in Canadian politics. And as you've mentioned, the mainstream media has been continuously, vilifying Chinese Canadians, the Chinese Communist Party, and the Chinese government, of course. So I think that it's important to push back on this anti-China narrative. I know that on previous episodes of your show, you've equated this anti-Chinese interference narrative to building consent for a future military conflict with China, perhaps over Taiwan. So I think that it's really important to do everything that we can to build a bit of mutual understanding between China and Canada to try and repair a bit this relationship. Because over the past few years, there's really been a cascade of events where Canada has gone from having, a very pro-China policy to having a really very negative relationship with the People's Republic of China. One of the examples is that I did an interview with Senator Yenpo Wu, a Canadian senator, and he, discussed in considerable depth this foreign agents registry bill that was adopted by the federal parliament before the election. Basically, this makes it very difficult for Chinese Canadians to participate in Canada's democratic process because the bill has some very poorly defined language in terms of anybody who is associated with anybody who is working for a foreign government could be charged under this bill as a criminal offense. It's a bill that modified the criminal code, that added a new offense, and really includes up to a life sentence for participating in politics in association with a foreign power. And it doesn't say that you can't do this, but it says that if you do, you have to register and disclose this as basically out yourself as a foreign agent, even if you're not working for a foreign government or anything like that. So it's a bill that's yet to face any challenges in court. It's yet to be implemented. There's no commissioner that's been named for it, and the more precise rules are yet to be defined. But it is preoccupying, and especially when Senator Wu told me that his advice to Chinese Canadians, right, people who hold Canadian citizenship, that they should not participate in the democratic process for the moment because of the threats associated with this bill. And of course, this bill targets particularly Chinese Canadians because, of course, the Chinese government plays a very, very big role in Chinese society. So there's a lot of people from China that have worked for the government, for example. And the term associated with is very vague. So, people, for example, who their spouse has, worked for a Chinese university or something like that could be considered foreign agents and could potentially go to jail in Canada for participating in the election. So these are major problems that we have, and I hope that it doesn't actually come to that, and that this bill doesn't, the rules for this bill are not so constrictive that they really limit people's ability to participate. But the Chinese government invited me on this trip through the embassy. I think that it's a great opportunity to learn a bit more about what's taking place there and to build some bridges.
Yeah, I think it is it's important when the Stephen Chase and Bob Fife at the Globe and Mail are basically it's a sort of witch hunt against any Chinese Canadian that has any sort of connection to China or the Chinese government. That's not just like China is all bad. That doesn't that just sort of ignores the fact that by World Bank statistics, the Chinese government's brought 800 million people out of extreme poverty over the past multiple decades. I mean, a remarkable success doesn't mean, by stating that, doesn't mean you support everything that the Chinese government's ever done, of course. But it's a remarkable success that deserves attention, and just this blanket demonization of China is pretty extreme. I would take a little bit of would challenge a little bit this notion that Canada had good relations with China. I'd say that,
Right.
and if you look the history since 49 Canada went to war in Korea in the early 50s, partly in response to the Chinese communist nationalist revolution of 49, Mao's forces taking power, and Canada refused to recognize China until the early 1970s. But of course, there was a period where there was an opening for mostly for capitalist kind of reasons of building up economic relations with China through the 90s and into the early 2000s, and even in early on, in Trudeau was even trying to negotiate a free trade agreement, just like Stephen Harper tried to investment agreement with China. But this what's happened over the past decade of open hostility, where we announce an Indo-Pacific strategy, where we openly announce that the main thing we're doing is sending more naval vessels to patrol the Taiwan Strait and the region in what's clearly designed to align with the U.S. Bid to contain China's rise and prepare for a war against that country is a pretty aggressive and market shift. So your trip going there is not just a sort of learning experience, It's also sort of a bit of a, if you want to frame it like this, an FU to this sort of, anti-China hysteria that the Globe and Mail particularly is pushing and saying, I'm going to go there. I'm going to go on a trip that's sponsored by the Chinese government. I'm not just going to cower to that sort of fear mongering and the like. Um, and so you wrote a big post about that. That's a correct assessment?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that it's important for progressives to push back against this anti-China narrative. And I mean, people are in Canada are exposed continuously to anti-Chinese propaganda. I mean, you mentioned Canada sending ships, to patrol the Taiwan Strait, ships and military aircraft. And a number of times, these aircraft and ships have had CBC journalists on board. And they go and they challenge Chinese sovereignty over the Strait of Taiwan. And then when they get intercepted by Chinese aircraft and Chinese ships, well, they try and portray China as an aggressor and all of this. Like, what is Canada doing on the other side of the world, sailing those boats there and challenging that airspace? It's an aggressive move. It's a provocation. And it's important to note that China has not been to war or in a massive military conflict for over 4 decades. This is something that a lot of people overlook. And we've had all kinds of
Well, well,
stories.
well, just wanted to show while Canada's bombed Libya, while Canada's been in war, Afghanistan, while Canada's been bombed and invaded Iraq or Kuwait in the early 90s and other places. Just
Yeah, that's it. And even Canada supporting the bombing of the Houthis in Yemen, more recently, our support for Israel, our support for Ukraine, the NATO proxy wars, and that sort of thing. Like Canada is a far more aggressive country than China, even though we have much smaller population and probably a much smaller military. But what role are these countries playing in the world, right? And there's not just what I mentioned about the ships and everything, but also like a few months back we had a story about a supposed Chinese spy balloon that was floating like over the United States and stuff like that. It was shot down by the Air Force. Turned out it was a regular weather balloon. There was no spy equipment on board, but like for days, like, North America was fixated on these Chinese supposed spy balloons and stuff like that. So there's a lot of really crazy like stories that people are being told about China that are not really based in fact, and often when they're disproven, it's like days later and it's a small mention. So people have developed a somewhat negative impression of China. Like even when you talk about stuff like the environment, people often point to China and say, "Oh, they're the biggest polluter" and stuff like that. I mean, well, they do have a population of 1.4 billion people, right? And they do manufacture stuff for a lot of other places. So, you could consider that imported or exported emissions. But when it comes to the fight against climate change, from what I understand, they've made massive progress. They've got, a huge public transit networks, right? Huge subway systems. I'm going to be traveling on some trains that run at over 300 kilometers an hour. And that's it. So the solar panels, the small electric vehicles, like that in Canada right now you can't even buy a small electric vehicle. It's only like large sedans and SUVs and up. They canceled all of the small electric vehicles. You can't get the Nissan Leaf. You can't get the electric smart car anymore. But meanwhile, in China, they're pumping out small electric vehicles for something like $15,000 Canadian per vehicle. So, these are some key elements to the energy transition. It's the same thing with solar panels. They've developed a huge expertise in manufacturing solar panels. Well, what has Canada done to counter that? They put a 100% tariff on electric vehicles and a 100% tariff on solar panels coming from China on the request of Joe Biden. So, the fact that Canada is willing to slow down the energy transition here in order to put pressure on China, I think is very unfortunate. And it's also that both Canada and China are targets of the Trump trade war. And so I think that we need to, look and learn from China. I mean, look at the circular economy that they've developed over there. For a long time, Canada, we were exporting trash to China. Like they would send us container ships full of products and stuff like that. And then we got all these empty containers going back. So we started filling them with supposedly recycling, but very low quality recycling. China's now banned the import of Canadian waste like that, but they seem to have managed to have quite a self-sustaining circular economy. So I think that that is interesting. And what can Canada learn from this? How can Canada take inspiration and ideas from China and apply them here? I when I've been preparing for this trip, I've been speaking to many people about China and many people who have been to China. One person, Brendan Stone, actually from the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, told me that when he was coming back from China, he gets into the super high tech subway system. You got the high speed rail going right into the airport and everything. No homeless people anywhere. And then you get in the plane, come back to Canada, and try to make it from Toronto Airport to Hamilton, and you're taking a GO train at 40 kilometers an hour, passing by homeless camps and that kind of thing, tent cities. So which is the third world country between the two? I mean, I've never been to China. I don't have a holistic impression of what it's like in the countryside and everywhere like that. But as you mentioned in the intro, they have done a lot to lift people out of poverty. It is, from what I understand, an affordable place for average people to work and live. So I'm looking forward to gathering as much information as possible and seeing how some of these lessons, technologies, and plans can be applied to Canada.
Yeah, I think it's pretty seems should be pretty obvious that efforts to share successes and failures between peoples in different places of the world is a basic thing that we should do, and this whole business of just closing off exchange and stuff like that because of the imperatives of empire is very self-defeating for humanity's sake. Not to mention the fact that obviously we're in it together in terms of collectively dealing with the climate crisis, and emissions that are released one place have an impact elsewhere, and the like. Now, I attended the press conference for the Jonathan Perneau, the co-leader of the Green Party, where he laid out the Green Party of Canada. You're the leader of the Green Party of Quebec, their foreign policy vision. And Pedno was quite clear, mentions multiple times where he views China, Russia, and now recently under Trump, the US as three superpowers that were a threat to Canada, and that they were a threat to international law. And I think you can make a very good case that Russia's invasion of Ukraine violates international law, and you can obviously make a case that the U.S. has, been involved in wars and bombings and for decades and decades, including currently in Yemen, that violate international law. But as you mentioned, China, no one claims that China's at war or bombing anywhere, and even when you talk about like a global military footprint, China only has one international base in Djibouti, I believe, and whereas Canada actually has four or five international bases in Kuwait and Jamaica and Germany, and I believe there's one or negotiating one in Singapore. So this idea that China is, as Pedno was suggesting, that China might like invade Canada. I mean, it's just it seems to me just totally fanciful. But what's your
Yeah, there's a term for that, right? It's called yellow peril, the irrational fear of Chinese invasion.
and it goes back historically. There's a long history there. But yeah, so what's your sort of assessment of the Green Party? And Elizabeth May has been quite hostile to China for many years as well. What's your sort of assessment of the federal Greens position on this?
Well, look, the federal Green Party's foreign policy is a complete disaster. I mean, these people are running a fear-based campaign to coincide with their new support for increased military spending, the construction of new military bases in the Arctic, increasing troop levels, buying fighter jets now, as you've pointed out. So they're trying to find ways to justify this new militaristic Green Party platform that they're running on. And of course, making people fear China is a main part of that. Also, it's important to look at the context, right? Like the Green Party co-leader Jonathan Pedno has presented himself as a journalist and a human rights defender and this sort of thing. But if you take a look back at his career, where he's gone, at what time, most of the foreign assignments that he's gone to have been in places where the West is trying to destabilize local governments, right? Like he has gone and done journalism and human rights work in Libya, in Ukraine, in Venezuela, in Georgia, in parts of Africa as well that the West was looking to destabilize. So this is not a person who comes to politics with a background in the peace movement or the anti-war movement or anything like that. It's more somebody who is looking to sort of prepare Canada for military conflict in the future. And their stance towards China of trying to get people to fear it and stuff like that, I think is really problematic. Like even with the trade war, they're saying, well, we need to build relationships with other countries and everything, but not China, like everybody but China kind of thing. And it's also worth noting that both of the Green Party members of Parliament voted for this foreign agents registry bill. Not only that, but they wanted to actually delay the federal election so that the MPs could go back to Ottawa and vote more foreign interference laws. So this is a very strange pattern, and I think that they've completely lost their way when it comes to foreign policy, and I condemn their hawkish stance towards China. It's one thing to say that you want to have like a more local economy and maybe rely a little bit less on manufacturing stuff on the other side of the world and shipping it here, but they're going far beyond that, and they're trying to portray China as an aggressor when, as you mentioned, it's not actually the case, and when Canada has been a much more aggressive voice in the world, and that the Green Party is supporting that aggressive voice on pretty much everything except Palestine a little bit. But even then, the Pedno will call it a genocide. We won't call for sanctions, so it's not credible in my view.
And the discussion of foreign interference, pointed this out, made this comment many times. I believe that the brouhaha around foreign interference in Canada does reflect foreign interference. It reflects the US influence in Canada, prodding this country to turn towards an anti-China perspective. And even if you look directly at some of the organizations like the Disinformation Watch at Macdonald-Laurier Institute, or the Uyghur Advocacy Project. They're funded by the American government. These are some of the groups that have been pushing the whole foreign interference thing in Canada. They are funded by the U.S. government, State Department, for the purpose of doing that. And then more broadly, if you look at the Canadian military intelligence agencies that are really the ones pushing this, they are the ones who have the closest ties to their U.S. Counterparts. And another notable part in this current foreign interference discussion and election, and the Globe and Mail's sort of focusing on China, is that Benjamin Netanyahu made it pretty clear about a week ago that he wants to have Pierre Poilievre as the next Prime Minister of Canada, and interfered pretty overtly. And that's just his one comment, but it fits within a whole series of ways in which Israel interferes in Canadian affairs, and that gets almost no attention in the dominant media. So the foreign interference thing, it doesn't focus on U.S. interference, which is the most significant, and then it doesn't focus on the next most significant, particularly in the time of a horrible genocide in Gaza, Israel. But it really hypes up a Chinese influence, which is fairly limited, certainly compared to the U.S. or Israel. So I guess maybe just if you have any final thoughts in terms of maybe that question, or what else you hope to get out of your trip.
Yeah, well, I think it's exactly true what you're saying. Canada does not really have an independent foreign policy. We're influenced very deeply by United States, and the same thing with Israel. You mentioned when Netanyahu tweeted to call Mark Carney to order because he had sort of implied in response to a protester that there was a genocide taking place in Palestine, and of course Mark Carney obeyed the orders. And that's not the only time. Like I actually had somebody from the Israeli consulate in Montreal that was attacking me on Twitter a couple months ago during the anti-NATO protests and that kind of thing. So, I mean, this could be a way of foreign interference, and we have to be mindful of that. But at the same time, like we can't go so far on this foreign influence thing that we say that nobody can ever have a dialogue with another country, nobody can ever visit like another country and stuff like that. Like it is important to build perspectives. So I think that that's something really important, and I think that the left also has to be, very vigilant when it comes to foreign policy because there's a lot of people, trying to make the argument that, supporting war confrontation is like progressive and stuff like that. There's, a lot of spin going around. So people should watch out for that, right? Anybody who's trying to talk you into supporting a military conflict, to supporting, war or hating people from another country, you have to question that very, very deeply, right? And so those are some of the things that I'm hoping to break down, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what people from the Foreign Affairs Ministry in China have to say about the Canada-China relationship. I think it's going to be a fascinating discussion. They've even invited us to observe the daily press briefing of the Chinese Foreign Ministry. So, look, for me, it's a huge honor to be invited there. I knew that there could be some criticism associated with myself accepting this trip, and I thought about it carefully, but really the only reason to refuse would have been the anti-China narrative, right? And I didn't want to let the anti-China narrative impact my decision as to whether to go or not. So therefore, I decided to go. And I think it's going to be a great opportunity, and look forward to probably discussing it with you again, see what happens, see what kind of knowledge can be gained from there, so that we can build a Canada that has better relations on the world stage, that stands for peace, and that is not continuously going around trying to start wars with other countries.
Thanks a lot for coming on Talking Foreign Policy, and I hope safe travels.
Thank you.